the people that are most successful in our industry tend to be the ones that have come from other industries that have the ability to kind of articulate and communicate in a way that is not necessarily second nature to someone who had a computer focused or engineering focused mindset. So that ability to kind of straddle multiple worlds is incredibly valuable.
Hello and welcome to Cool Vector. I'm David Snow, your host. And today we're joined by Phill Lawson-Shanks of Align Data Centers, Nabeel Mahmood of Nomad Futurist and a Cool Vector editorial advisor, and Phillip Koblence of Critical Ventures, also a Cool Vector editorial advisor. Gentlemen, welcome to the program today. Great to have you here. We have got a lot to talk about. The three of you have spent quite a lot of time thinking about and speaking about and connecting with others about the future of the digital infrastructure industry. Today, we're going to talk about the growth of that industry, but in particular, we're going to talk about the need for humans amid all of the blinking lights and digital infrastructure. Why don't we start with a question for Nabeel Mahmood? Nabeel, help us understand, first of all, just the scope of the change and the growth that's going to take place. What is the human capital component that you spend a lot of time thinking about?
Technology has actually become native to us. What's happened over the last 5 years, particularly after COVID, is what we used to talk about as an digital transformation and the ability to be nomadic and work from anywhere, whereby it was just a dream. It came to reality. And everyone is able to work remotely and be involved in this digital space, which means there's a lot of compute that's happening, which means there's a lot of enhancements in technology and innovation in data that's happening. So the culture is changing, technology is changing, and that's more and more data. What does that really mean? That there's going to be more and more data centers that are going to be built. There's more and more application and technology stacks that are being deployed that are going to have to be serviced. The challenge here on in is that 47% of the existing workforce in the data infrastructure space globally has been in this sector for roughly about 25 years, which means, theoretically speaking, if the age out is 30 years, there's going to be a retirement party 5 years from now, every day of the week. The second part of that equation is that 30% of the workforce, on top of that 47%, has been in this sector for about 10 to 25 years. Now, that doesn't mean that they are young bucks. That means that there is a number in there of people that have actually moved from different sectors to come into our space. So if you put the age out multiplier, I potentially see that 2/3 of the workforce is going to be exiting within the next 5 to 10 years. We need more people. So we have a mass exodus, and we're not backfreshing the talent and the resources. And we're not even thinking about the number of people that are needed by the time, let's say 2030, 2040, to service all of these applications and demand. So that's where the challenge is. I foresee by 2050, 9.4 billion people on this planet are going to have to be connected. What does that tell you? It tells you that there's a lot of data points. Everyone's going to have some sort of a connected device, which means that we have to service that industry. So the challenge is there as it entails to human capital, and we need to start today.
If you think about like the 30,000-foot view of how we got to this point, it's incredible the progress we've made in terms of technology, but it's in such a short period of time. Digital infrastructure industry is what, 25, maybe 30 years old. We started in the late 90s when I had a thick flowing head of hair, similar to Nabeel, maybe not that great, and this is what it's done to me. The people that were around, like us at the beginnings of this industry are still the ones that are largely running it. And in the intervening period, you have all of these folks that have come in. Anyone that's born after, say, 2003 has lived in a world with an iPhone in it. Well, they're making memories in a world with an iPhone in it because the iPhone came out in 2007, where it was not only their primary communications device, it raised them. They weren't really a party to what infrastructure had to be put in place in order to facilitate it. And as a consequence of that, and as a consequence of the fact that we're living in this kind of technology revolution, there really isn't a structure, a curriculum. The education system hasn't really been upgraded to the point where the concepts of digital infrastructure have really been integrated into there. So when people hear that human beings are needed to develop digital infrastructure, that is a surprising concept to them. because it would always work. What do you mean? It's online. It's the cloud. It's infinitely elastic. It just continues to grow, but it's still growing on a lot of the infrastructure that was developed by people that happened to be around at the dawn of this digital infrastructure age, which is, I can't believe I'm old enough to say the turn of the century, in 2000. It's incumbent upon us as we age out to recognize that the fascination with which we came into this industry, because it was so new, and we had to kind of create all the infrastructure and understood it fundamentally because we were there at the beginnings of it, isn't as clear to people that leverage technology on a day-to-day basis, that don't necessarily recognize that with AI and then quantum computing, more of these physical buildings need to be built all over the place, and they need people in order to run them, support them, design them, et cetera.
Phill Lawson-Shanks, you are the Chief Innovation Officer at a major data center company, Aligned. From your perspective and from the perspective of a major data center operator, how do you see the human capital deficit? Is that something that your company is noticing? Is it taking steps to address it?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just in the operations, we're seeing it in the construction industry as well. The ability to find qualified electricians or mechanical engineers in the locations that we need them to be. We're really at a pivotal moment in history. I would suggest we're at an iPhone moment again. Do you remember back, as Phil mentioned, in 2007 when the iPhone was created? People liked it, people hated it, it didn't have a keyboard. No one anticipated the ecosystem that would develop around that piece of technology. With the advent now of, particularly in the last couple of days, agentic AI, we've seen all these big models being created, the large language models, the tools that are coming out of those in scale, these intelligent agents that will need to be placed in close proximity to existing cloud architectures, but in low latency locations. So in places that they haven't had data centers before, to give that low latency access to these new agents that are doing an amazing things, taking off our hands the repetitive tasks that we don't want to do. It's going to change the world again. We're only just seeing the very beginning of that. So when you think about building larger or extending our current portfolio in the physical locations they are, or building brand new locations, new zones all across the Americas, all across the world, then we need to think about how we're bringing new staff in, but keep the lights on, essentially. So as a company, we pull from many adjacent talent pools, like the Navy nuclear submariner groups. We have a lot of those because once you've had that training in how to keep people alive underwater for extended periods of time next to a nuclear reactor, moving them to a data center, having that methodology of procedures and policy, and you don't just do things as checks and balances before you make any changes. That's critical. So we take a lot of those people and we developed our own training infrastructure. Part of the Nomad Futurist program is putting in talent that probably won't go to college. This is a wonderful environment to pour those kids into. And that's part of what we do here by our evangelism into that sector, pulling them in, giving them internships, training them. So you don't need to have an academic background. You don't need to have an engineering background. Those things are very valuable, but we can train people with the right mindset and the right ability to service this amazing tsunami that's coming of technology.
Phillip Koblence from Critical Ventures. Help us understand just the range of roles, jobs within these data centers for people who are not as in the weeds as you. Just give us an overview of what are these positions and where are the pain points?
I mean, we talk about this all the time, where as an industry, we're unique in that there are sub verticals within our industry that run the full gamut. It's not just engineering folks that are computer nerds like myself that end up in this industry. So it's everything from design, civil engineering, civil planning, through the actual construction and every element under construction, whether it's mechanical or electrical. There are so many people we've spoken to that have construction backgrounds that are like, I'd love to get into the data center industry, but what do I know about it? Probably more than most of the people that are in it, because those are incredibly relevant skill sets, all the way through structured cabling and some of the more obvious computerized elements of it, through security and data science and the critical services on the compute side as well, and racking and stacking of servers, and making sure that the networks behind them all work. And then you can escalate through the engineering stack up to the application layer and get get really into the weeds as far as engineering goes. And that doesn't even take into account all the finance and accounting and sales and marketing. And the people that are most successful in our industry tend to be the ones that have come from other industries that have the ability to kind of articulate and communicate in a way that is not necessarily second nature to someone who had a, computer focused or engineering focused mindset. So that ability to kind of straddle multiple worlds is incredibly valuable. But I'm sure I can come up with a reason why someone that was a buggy whip manufacturer would be a perfect candidate for a digital infrastructure position.
I'm pretty sure we can actually bring the Amish country in it as well. So to answer the question on a 30,000 foot level, we are the only sector globally that can leverage other resources from any other vertical. So, for instance, I mean, lobbying, for instance, needs to be a relatively large focus so that we can get our narrative right, push that through the regulation, compliance, and standardization in government bodies globally. So there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of jobs that are in this sector that are probably not talked about very openly.
Even the philosophy and poli-sci majors, even the philosophy and poli-sci majors
Exactly.
have a place
Yeah.
in our industry.
Nabeel, you mentioned lobbying. It's interesting that as the world begins to take notice of the data center industry, the first thing that people with limited information say is, "Oh, it hoovers up all the energy." The next thing you hear a lot of people say is, "Oh, it doesn't really create any jobs."
Well, so for starters, I think the pundits that continue to talk about and backlash us are the ones that have no idea what the sector is doing or is capable of. We need to educate the community. We need to have a social accord to engage the community locally. Starting with the first point that you said that we are the energy hogs. That's not true. The whole data center sector this year is probably going to end up roughly about 2 to 2.25% of the global energy usage. We need to look at other sectors. Let's just look at the steel manufacturing. Let's look at air transportation or just transportation in general. I mean, they have a large carbon impact than we do. Okay. We do have our problems, we have our challenges. And that's why we need to have regulatory standards. That's why we need to have lobbying to understand where the challenges are and standardize our sector as it entails to reporting efficiency ratios and or energy utilization and developing those metrics that basically clarify or help our narrative.
The metrics by which economic development are measured simply has not evolved to keep pace with our changing kind of economy, right? So if you look at Loudoun County, Virginia, as an example, and the benefits to that community from digital infrastructure taking hold in terms of tax revenue, in terms of benefits to schools and the underlying community, it's incredible. If your entire focus is trapped in a kind of 1950s, 1960s mindset of you are going to build this building, and as Nabeel puts it, how many bums are you going to put in the seats? Doesn't work well with my accent, but that's just not going to be a metric that is as exciting or relevant to our current economy.
Organizations like Nomad Futurist are advocating for the idea that digital infrastructure is a great opportunity for humans and for employment in the workforce. But what are some common misperceptions that you see that need to be dealt with? How do we demystify this industry?
I think it's communication. It's all about communication. If you think about our industry, you're equated to other mysterious industries. People just assume they can plug a device into their power outlet and it just works. They have very little understanding of all of that architecture infrastructure that has to go on behind the scenes. As we develop these buildings across the globe, we're actually generating not only jobs within those buildings, which are very good, very high paying jobs, but also because, as I say, this iPhone moment, we're creating the ability for brand new industries to develop that no one ever considered possible or even thought about before. So it's a catalyst to change. It's a catalyst to human development. We're really on the forefront of all of that right now.
People think you need to be a computer geek in order to work in a data center or to work in digital infrastructure, and it's simply not the case. If anything, the majority of the roles are non-computer focused roles and more involved in the development and deployment of these sites that need to be everywhere. The two things that we need to do is make sure that that's as clear as possible. And the other is to kind of introduce the concepts of the foundational elements that power our increasingly digital world. Is that a bumper sticker or what? um, as early as possible in the arc of an education process. So in STEM programs, STEAM programs, K through 12, we need to like fundamentally make sure that kids who are biologically like eh, addicted to technology understand not just how it works because they understand it probably better than their parents, but why it works. Like what is the infrastructure that powers that stuff, not just so they come into our industry, but just so they are better consumers of it and don't like turn into crazy people like the kids in my house when the internet doesn't work, and actually have the ability to troubleshoot.
Phil, I thought you had a contract with your kids for no downtime in your home.
Right?
That's
Is that
there's going to be penalties for that downtime.
no doubt
It's
the
the
100%
0.01% that
the
matters.
the hundred
That's when
percent
they turn.
SLA the 100% SLA is much more stringent within my house than it is with my tenants.
There's been a sort of a case study that just came out in the news recently. Maybe I could get the reaction of you three. And it has to do with the public acceptance of and government advocacy for digital infrastructure. We see that Meta is going to build a $10 billion development in the, let's call it, relatively economically disadvantaged area of northeastern Louisiana. According to the press release that came out, there's going to be 5,000 short-term construction jobs created and about 500 permanent operational jobs. Then you have, quotes from the governor of Louisiana, very pro. There's, economic development agencies. Phill, Lawson-Shanks, is that the kind of sort of coordinated advocacy that is needed? Do you think we're going to see a lot more of this sort of public-private partnership of trying to get the public excited about these developments and not apprehensive?
Yeah, in fact, we do a lot of that. What really got me excited about Nomad Futurist is to do that at the high school level. We've been doing that a lot in our communities anyway, because it's not only those jobs in the buildings, but there's all of the tertiary infrastructure. It's the new homes that are developed around that. It's the core infrastructure. It's the restaurants. It's the coffee shops. It's the laundromats, the hairdressers. All of those tertiary industries that develop around these new zones. Because once you build a data center, it's there for a very, very, very long time. So it's not going away. And this industry is not on the decline. It's absolutely on the ascendancy. So to invest in the community means a long-term commitment to be part of that community. In fact, I'm not going to give away a lot of the secrets we do because it puts us ahead. But we go ahead of time. We start working with the Economic Development Council. We start working with the local community leaders to understand what they really need in that area to impact them in a very positive way as we join that community as a member.
I'm not sure I would appreciate as much the hairdressers that come to a digital infrastructure development as maybe you would. Meta is partnering with the government of Louisiana to try to trumpet this as a huge win. Once Meta deploys there, as a hyperscale type of company, it attracts all sorts of other development in that region. So once they plant their flag there, or Amazon plants their flag somewhere, or Microsoft plants their flag somewhere, or Oracle plants their flag somewhere, it inevitably attracts other developments as well. So it's the start of something much larger than simply that one organization developing land there.
And there's more than 500 jobs that they're referring to, right? I mean, there's other partnerships, alliances within the data infrastructure, all the way into the application stack, security, and other environments that it's creating that's not necessarily being talked about. That could be either in that area or nationally or globally.
To your point, in the press release, it identified an additional 1,000 jobs that were sort of not non-direct, but related to the development of a digital infrastructure hub in Louisiana. I'm interested, Nabeel, since your foundation is involved with high school students, what is their reaction? How's it going so far? Are you drumming up interest? Is this something that a kid looks at and says, "Oh yeah, this seems like a job for me"?
Absolutely. I mean, so far the reaction and engagement has been amazing. The problem that now we are running into is that they all want to go visit a data center. So there's hundreds of students that want to go to a data center. However, our security protocols are so stringent that I can't really take everybody in there yet. So we've got to be a little bit more creative into how we give them that exposure and create the level of excitement. So we're finding ways to give them that hands-on experience.
There is so much engagement. You get up on a stage and it's a bunch of high school kids or in some cases junior high school kids. We did one in MVLA high school in California, where we had a representative from Netflix, a representative from TikTok, these applications that these kids are leveraging, as well as people from the digital infrastructure community, the buildings where these services live. And once the kids recognize that these applications that they're using, the games that they're using, there is no Roblox or Minecraft or Fortnite or any of those things without large scale data center and digital infrastructure developments. You could see this aha moment. But I think the primary question that they ask is especially this generation is really related to the environment, like how resource utilization and how it's going to impact the world. And I think they're interested in how they get involved so they can have a seat at the table with the environmental impacts that it will be them and their children that are going to be exposed to those impacts. So it's hugely reassuring to see the level of engagement and hands that go up once you start talking about, like, this is not just an industry where you have a potential career path. This is the industry that runs and facilitates all of these other things that you're doing in your life. And we not only need your help, but we need your perspective and for you to have a stake in the outcome of how these things are developed. So it's really amazing.
We constantly hear about this generational gap and that, the next generation isn't smart enough, they're not involved. And I'll tell you, in the last couple of years, my experience has been the total opposite. They are a lot smarter than we think that they are. They've got access to more information and data, and they're trying to figure out how to fix these problems. So we, in our capacity, need to be engaged and provide them resources, education, expose the sector to them, and experiences whereby it does end up becoming muscle memory. So they are going to do things for the right reason.
We're all aware that immigration has been a topic of discussion in the US, and there's going to be perhaps a different immigration policy going forward. Nabeel, what would you like to see as far as the digital infrastructure industry making use of immigrants to the US and perhaps crafting policies around giving us an advantage because we have such a large immigrant community?
I do not want to run for office or make any statement here on in that might affect my career. On a positive note, what Trump is doing, or at least the statement that he's made about, giving everyone an opportunity that moves to America on a student visa to potentially be an American resident, probably does make sense. But the fact of the matter is that the U.S. market is going to cap out maybe in the next 10 to 15 years. The last connect is going to be in Zanzibar, in Tanzania, or South America, or Cuba, right? The rest of the world needs to be connected. I really do see that that's where the opportunity is. Now, we don't need to bring all of those people to America. Our charter really is to expose people in those underserved communities globally where the future is, where the last connect is going to be. So they stay local, and we don't have to fund resources from primary markets like the UK or America into those markets. That addresses a social accord whereby if we can give them a lifestyle and a quality of life or enough money so they don't have to leave their country and move to America, it helps solve some of those immigration challenges.
What the internet has done, what digital infrastructure has done, is it's made the world a smaller place. And as a consequence of that, you have these huge multinational companies, many of them headquartered in the US, that need to get perspectives on other experiences from people that live those experiences directly, particularly as they start deploying in all of these, far off regions, as you need to get closer for either inferencing for AI or some of the, other technologies that Phill mentioned earlier that require you as close to the populations, as close to these regions as possible in order to be successful. You need to have an understanding of the perspective of what's going on in those communities and how technology is being leveraged, and that can only come from lived experience.
To double down on what Nabeel was saying, we take cloud for granted in America. But if you look at the global population, it's only about 20% of the global population has access to cloud. And cloud is a fundamental architecture for all of the new AI that's coming out. It needs to reference that, even the inference, to make that work better. So we're going to see that explode across the rest of the world. And obviously, we're leading the charge here in the Americas. This is where it was created. This is where most of the capital has been invested into to make it is what it is today. But that will extend across the planet. And if people come to the States, learn it, and they go back and take it home, that's phenomenal. I mean, all boats rise in this environment.
How international do you see the data center industry becoming over the next decade or so?
Oh, incredible. I mean, it's an old adage. Countries that trade together don't war against each other. For trading, you need to have a commonality of interest. And if there's a shared knowledge base, then that's the grounding for that. So it's all about education, communication, then everything builds upon that, I would suggest. I came here 28 years ago and I worked for a large global company. And I remember going to a meeting in my first or second week. We were talking about market dynamics across the planet. And they had North America numbers and then ROW. And I actually had to ask, what is ROW? Oh, it's rest of world. Oh, well, that's where I used to live. And there's that, we have to break that mentality.
Part of the challenge is when we actually have World Series where we don't invite anybody.
True. Exactly. Exactly. You and I could talk about that a lot. Yeah.
In the United States. We're going to start seeing a lot of build outs in areas where there's potentially stranded power available today that we can actually get an infrastructure up and running relatively quickly. I foresee that we are actually going to move where we can find the cheapest power. So that's where cloud and moving data on a real-time basis is going to change the market and how we grow in the future, which means that we've got to fund and create local jobs.
Look, inevitably, we had a term of art that was used in our industry that we refer to as the edge. The edge is wherever the people are, right? The edge is in your pocket, in your phone, on your, Aura ring or whatever. And that's what's creating data. And inevitably, digital infrastructure is that thing that aggregates all of that data. So wherever the people are is where digital infrastructure needs to live. And that inevitably not only takes care of every landmass on Earth, but there's all sorts of talk about subsea cables that like connect all these things. So even the oceans have digital infrastructure in them, and that's not just talking about the Microsoft submerged data center off the coast of Ireland that they recently decommed. So there is not a place on this planet that will not have or currently has some level of digital infrastructure, and to a certain extent it's the more mature markets that are harder to upgrade. So some of the emerging markets, particularly those that have not had their resources tapped, their power grids really strained, might be the easiest ones to come up with the next evolution of these deployments, which you see in terms of even cell phones, right? If you look at populations and the pace with which they've grown in terms of cell phone usage in general, it tends to be those emerging market populations that grow more quickly because they don't have the burden of like the original communications infrastructure. I like to say history doesn't repeat itself, it tends to rhyme. It should not be a surprise where this is all going and how much better served we would be by recognizing that the world needs to work together for the betterment of this infrastructure.
Final question for the three of you. We're here, December 2024. What are your predictions for the top conversations around human capital in digital infrastructure? What do you think the biggest pain points will be in 2025? Maybe we could start with Phill Lawson-Shanks for your predictions.
Hmm. I think construction is going to be paramount, honestly, and also the understanding of energy, how to create and manage energy in whatever form that takes its case, whether it's natural gas generation, whether it's eventually nuclear in the next several years, all of that. So it's the fundamental building blocks of this infrastructure that we're deploying. That's very important. Building it, creating it, maintaining it, and then on the back end of that, do people need to learn coding, or do they need to learn syntactical grammar and critical thinking, so they can actually create intelligent questions for these agents? It's very akin to the first industrial revolution, when the agrarian society migrated to cities and then transitioned to how they worked and lived and played. Well, there wasn't a lot of playing in those days, but how they certainly lived and worked. I think we're going to see a lot of that. There's a lot of parallels, as Phill says. It is a rhyme. There's rather than a repetition.
I totally concur with Phill Lawson-Shanks. I believe at the foundation is where the problem is going to be. We can't get enough people to design, build existing environments, and we don't have enough people to do retrofit work on the sites that are up and running. So at the core of it all, power seems to be a challenge, and will continue to be the challenge for the next year or two.
The short-term problem is no doubt, construction, building these sites, to a certain extent, the hardware that's needed, transformers, et cetera, to power the site. I think we're going to continue to have the kind of human capital deficit conversation for the foreseeable future. Nabeel calls it backflushing of talent. The amount of time over the course of someone's educational career and professional career where they learn about the existence of digital infrastructure is minute. We just don't have the ability to teach enough people what we do in order to get the levels of engagement that we need to not only handle the amount of facilities and digital infrastructure we have under development, but also handling this kind of age out and generational dynamics of the coming retirement parade. As a foundation, our focus is not so much trying to solve the problem in 2025 and 2026, but solving the problem of who's going to lead this industry in 2030, 2040, 2050. And in order to really start planting those seeds and finding those leaders, you need to engage with students and children at a much earlier stage.
Let's say construction is an area where there's simply not enough people for the job ahead. What will be the consequences of that deficit, let's say in 2025? Is it simply that projects that people wanted to get up and running are simply going to be delayed?
I mean, I don't see any way around that. I've seen a lot of robotic printing of buildings. That doesn't really work at this scale. It's a people issue. Absolutely.
And there are also unique elements, right? It's not like you can ubiquitize a building that's going in California where you have, seismic activity that you have to account for, to a building that you're putting up in Florida, which has, maybe, hurricane grade requirements that you have to go for. Or, the Midwest, which has tornadoes. You need to have people that understand all of those dynamics. It's a matter of either delays or cost overruns, right? So, for the right price, you can get anything done quicker, but that price is going to redound to increase costs for services and stuff like that. So, there are a lot of dynamics at play and that we need to take into account.
Phill Lawson-Shanks from Aligned Data Centers, Nabeel Mahmood from Nomad Futurist, and Phillip Koblence from Critical Ventures. Thanks so much for joining Cool Vector today. And of course, Nabeel Mahmood and Phillip Koblence are editorial advisors to Cool Vector, and we're going to be producing a lot of great content for you in 2025 and beyond. So thanks for watching, and thanks to you three for sharing your considerable expertise.